Hi everybody and welcome to Heel Heat. My name is George Coles, and on this episode we're doing It Came From the Net. The topic of this It Came From the Network, WCW Uncensored 1996. This is an interesting time period in WCW. We're firmly in the Dungeon of Doom era. We're in the Hulk Hogan red and yellow era. We're just a few months before the NWO would arrive and change everything. This is looked at as a very down period in WCW's time. I have more fond memories of this time than most people do. I personally liked a lot of it better. With that being said, we're going to go into this. I wasn't expecting much of this, and I'll go through it as I keep going here. But I wanted to watch this because I remember liking the concept of the Doomsday cage match for the main event. So I'm going to go into this, do my review. If you haven't seen any of my videos previously, I do grade everything on a 1 to 5 scale, 1 being the worst, 5 being the best. With that being said, let's jump right into this. We start the show off with Conan going up against Eddie Guerrero for the United States Championship. This again is pre-NWO Conan, so he's still wearing the tights with the tassels on him, and Eddie Guerrero was still relatively new to the company and hadn't quite yet created the character that everybody would know and love and become one of the great characters in wrestling history. This was a solid match that was given enough time to be really good, and I enjoyed this. The commentary talks about how these two are friends, and it's making for a compelling match because they know each other so well, which was a nice touch. We have Tony Schiavone, Dusty Rhodes, and Bobby Heenan on commentary, which is a good team. They work well together here. This is a really fun match. It gets about 15 or so minutes here. We see an interesting end to it where it looks like Guerrero goes for a Hunan Karana and they kind of fall backwards with Conan headbutting Eddie Guerrero in the nether regions. Conan ends up getting a pin off of that, which obviously after the match makes Eddie Guerrero a little bit upset with Conan. Conan says he didn't know that he hit him there. Conan does pick up the win here. I'm giving this a 3. Up until that weird ending, it was going to be a 4 for me, but that ending just took away a bit. I thought it was kind of a little silly and a kind of a bad way to end this match. And we're going to see that might be a theme running through this show. After that, we go to the backstage area. We have Mean Gene Okerlund, and he's interviewing Colonel Robert Parker and Dick Slater. Later on in the show, we're going to have Colonel Parker going up against Medusa in an intergender match. I thought this was good. I always liked Colonel Parker, Robert Fuller. I always liked his promos, even going back to his Robert Fuller days in the stud stable. And Dick Slater is kind of one of those guys that's somewhat of a forgotten legend. I know there's some problematic stuff with him, and I get it, but I think he's definitely a character of the time frame. I thought this was pretty good. That's followed up with probably my favorite match on the card. We have Lord Steven Regal, which, if I call him William, just be okay with it, because for a quarter century he's been William Regal for me, going up against the Belfast Bruiser, aka Fit Finley, which again, if I call him Finley, just be okay with it, because a quarter century has been Fit Finley to me. This was a very hard-hitting European-style match. They worked a very stiff and, well, you could say a quasi-strong style against each other, where they made this look more like a fight than a wrestling match. These two guys are two of the reasons why watching WCW at this time frame for me was enjoyable. I really enjoyed the work that Steven Regal was doing, either here or in his Blue Bloods team, which I thought was an amazing tag team. And then Finley, the Belfast Bruiser, I don't think he ever quite got the recognition he deserved, either in WCW or WWE. I think he's a fantastic wrestler, a fantastic talent. This is a really brutal match. I want to say it was on Regal's podcast where he said that when he got busted open over the eye, it was from a legitimate punch from Finley, and that they agreed to do that, and they've done it a million times, which is just wow. Just to think of the thought coming into that, like going into a match going, oh, I'm not going to cut myself because I know if you punch me for real, I'm going to be able to bleed. This was rough. It was brutal. I thoroughly enjoyed it. However, again, we see the ending of the match take away from the match itself. Earl Robert Eaton, aka Beautiful Bobby Eaton, and Squire Dave Taylor come down, the rest of the Blue Bloods, and get involved. Basically set it up so Regal could punch the Belfast Bruiser in the face. They get disqualified. I'm going to have to take off again for the wonky finish. This is something I'd be more akin to seeing on Nitro, setting up a pay-per-view, than on the pay-per-view itself. I'm going to give this one a 3 again. It probably would have been a 4 like the Conan and Eddie Guerrero match, but the ending just took away from it, in my opinion. Then we go backstage. This time we have Mean Gene Okerlund with Jimmy the Mouth of the South Heart and the Giant, aka the Big Show. I do like this. Giant did a good promo here. He kind of rhymed a little bit, which was a little hokey, but still came off well. When I hear Giant using this voice, or Big Show using this voice where he's a little bit deeper, it always reminds me of Captain Insano more than anything else. I thought this was pretty good, especially knowing how new to the business the Giant was at this point. He's talking about his matchup coming on the show where he's going up against Loch Ness, aka Giant Haystacks. After that, we get an interview with Loch Ness, right back to back, which is pretty cool that they did that. Loch Ness didn't have a long tenure in WCW. I think he was only there 3 months or so. But in England, in the UK, he's an absolute legend as Giant Haystacks. And I kind of felt there was a little bit of a slight here with Mean Gene Okerlund telling him, "I know a good dentist," which you're insulting a talent right on screen. I feel like a little bit of what he was saying here, that when he came over to America he was promised a match with Hulk Hogan. I feel like that probably is somewhat true. Unfortunately, the Loch Ness we have here is towards the end of his career. I believe he passed away not even 2 years after this, so we're not going to get to see a great match from him, which is foreshadowing something that's coming later. I thought these promos were good. Not as good as the Colonel Parker promo, but still pretty good. Speaking of Colonel Parker, it's time for the intergender match. We have Colonel Robert Parker going up against Medusa. And I have to say this right off the bat, I'm not a wrestling fan that dislikes intergender matches just on the thought of intergender matches. There have been several I've enjoyed. One of my favorites, thinking back, was Tessa Blanchard versus Brian Cage at a Wrestle Circus show. A lot of Tessa Blanchard stuff with Sami Callihan I really enjoyed, and I know Tessa's problematic and I probably should use a better example here. The stuff they were doing in Lucha Underground where there wasn't a clear delineation between the women's and men's division, I thought was really fun as well. I'm using that to preference here. This was not a good match. And it kind of hurts me to say that because Medusa is one of the great women wrestlers of all time. Colonel Robert Parker, in his time, Robert Fuller, was a fantastic wrestler, a really great heel. And he was a good heel here. His heel role he played up in the male chauvinistic pig kind of way. Played it up very well. This match was a stinker. We see ultimately Dick Slater getting involved at the end to help Parker pick up the win. I thought this was bad. Unfortunately, on this card, it's not the worst match on the card, but it is pretty bad. I'm going to give this one a 2. Like I said, I expected a lot better from this. That's followed up with another backstage segment. This time we have Lee Marshall with the Road Warriors. The Road Warriors are pretty much doing a heel promo saying no one's safe, precursoring the match that they're going to have later against Sting and Booker T. Booker T is substituting for Lex Luger, who was Sting's tag team partner at the time, and the Road Warriors and Sting and Luger seem to have a little bit of a feud going on here. This was pretty good. If you like Road Warrior promos, you're going to like this. It's pretty much their standard promo. I mean, I'm not saying that because it's a bad thing. I'm saying it because it's a very good thing. I think they're awesome. They always hype me up. It was a great promo for me. Next up, we get a match with Diamond Dallas Page going up against the Booty Man, aka Brutus Beefcake. In this match, if DDP wins, he gets his lottery winnings, which was a thing. DDP had won the lottery. And Kimberly Page back, or Kimberly as they're just calling her here. If the Booty Man wins, DDP has to retire. It's so interesting going back and seeing this era of DDP and knowing in just a bit over a year after this, he would go to be one of their biggest stars. Because it absolutely felt like he was over-gimmicked here. Didn't quite know what to do. Didn't quite know what the character was. And you really feel it in this match. Part of it is the build-up for this feud was originally with Johnny B. Bad, who left to go to the WWE, and the Booty Man had to substitute in, who recently was in the Dungeon of Doom as the Zodiac, and it's just one of the 9 million different gimmicks that Brutus Beefcake had in WCW. This was not a good match. I've seen a lot better from Beefcake, and I've seen a ton better matches than this than from DDP. Ultimately, we get to the end where DDP forces a kiss on Kimberly, which, wow, that's problematic nowadays. You couldn't get away with that. Booty Man uses a distraction, hits the high knee. Get it? High knee. Booty Man. Ugh. They celebrate. DDP is forced to retire. Kimberly gets to be the booty babe. Wow. Just saying that out loud really feels like just bad. This wasn't a good match. Again, it was another match I thought was pretty bad. I'm giving this one a 2. I didn't enjoy it that much at all. That's followed up with a backstage segment with Mean Gene again. This time he has Jimmy Hart and Lex Luger. Basically, we get the reasoning for why Luger's not in a tag match. Jimmy Hart had a contract, which if Luger is in the main event, he no longer is managed by Jimmy Hart. It's a whole convoluted thing. A weird excuse to get him in the main event and out of the tag match. Good promo, though. I think these guys did well here. I thought it was interesting. That leads us into my least favorite match of the show, or at least one of the 2 least favorite matches. This does have a bit of an advantage of my other match that I really disliked on the show by being shorter. We get the Giant going up against Loch Ness in a Giant versus Giant match, a monster versus monster. This wasn't much of anything. Like I said, Loch Ness was towards the end of his career here and wasn't very mobile. The Giant was very young in his career and didn't quite have it in him yet to carry a match. This was quick. The Giant picks up a decisive win here. I'm giving this one a 1. Like I said, it was a bad match, just not that enjoyable. That's followed up with Lee Marshall doing an interview with Sting and Booker T, basically explaining the premise for their tag match. If Sting and Booker T pick up the win, Harlem Heat gets a tag title match. I believe if Booker T is the one that has the pin. Again, a little bit over convoluted, but seeing a team like Sting and Booker T is just awesome. That's followed right into our match with Sting and Booker T going up against the Legion of Doom, the Road Warriors, in a Chicago street fight, which means it's basically an anything goes, hardcore tornado style match, which was a good brawl. The biggest criticism I have with this is this went about 20-25 minutes, where I think if you would have condensed it down to 10-12 minutes, it would have been a really fun brawl, a really fun match. But it just overstayed its welcome. Again, like a lot of things on this card, it gets over convoluted at the end, where Booker T and Animal, I believe it is, it's one of the Road Warriors and Booker T, for some reason it's slipping my mind which one, are fighting in the backstage area. They fight past Lex Luger, who's staring at himself in a mirror, which I thought was a cool little touch. Animal attacks Luger, which brings Luger into the fold, and then Stevie Ray gets into the fold as well. So basically the 3 of them and Jimmy Hart attack Animal and handcuff him in the back, thus giving Booker T and Sting an advantage because Booker T comes back out to the ring. Basically, so him and Sting can pick up the win. Booker T and Sting win this here. Again, it was a little bit messy, a little convoluted. It's overstayed its welcome a bit. The ending was a little bit hokey, but I understand this. This, to me, worked as an ending better than the Regal and Finley match or the Conan and Eddie Guerrero match. In execution, it came off better than the other 2, so I'm not going to knock it off as much as I would those. The biggest problem, again, I think, is that it overstayed its welcome. If this would have been a 12 match, I probably would have rated it real high. That being said, it wasn't. I'm giving this one a 3. I thought it was good, but nothing great. Then we get to our main event. One of the most hated main events or wrestling matches in WCW history. We get a Doomsday cage match, which is 3 levels of cage on top of each other, which I always thought was a really cool concept, and it pulled off properly with the right wrestlers. Could make a very interesting match. Kind of felt like an Escape from New York movie built into a match where you kind of had to go through levels, almost like a video game even, to get to the end of it. We get our participants, Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage, the Mega Powers, going up against the Alliance to end Hulkamania, which is Ric Flair, Arn Anderson, Ming, the Barbarian, Kevin Sullivan, Z-Gangsta, aka Zeus or Debo, and the Ultimate Solution. Now, most of those people you're probably going to recognize. Ultimate Solution probably not as much. Ultimate Solution was a wrestler named Jeep Swanson, whose biggest claim to fame would be that he played Bane in the Batman and Robin movie. And I actually thought he did a good job there in that movie. He's one of the highlights of Batman and Robin. There's a lot of problematic things with this here. First off, he was initially called the Final Solution, which, if you know history, was Hitler's plan to eliminate the Jewish people, so not great. They had to quickly switch his name to the Ultimate Solution. So yeah, we're just going to go with that. And I'm not making fun of the guy, but he was obviously an avid steroid user. It's even been said, he even said it himself that he used steroids, because unfortunately he passed away not too long after this show. Maybe a year or so later, but it's so obvious. I mean, the guy is basically a walking steroid. And this match was just, like I said, it had the potential, the concept was good. If they would have narrowed this down to, like, say, Randy Savage and Hulk Hogan versus Lex Luger and Ric Flair, and had the same concept where they had to fight their way down the cage before finishing in the main ring, I think that would have been a better match of what we had. We seen kind of the levels thing where on the top level they fought Flair and Arn Anderson, on the middle level they fought the Faces of Fear, Megan the Barbarian, and even broke out of the cage. It always felt like the numbers were even, or at least close to even, a 2-on-2 or a 2-on-3, which to me, if I'm the Alliance to end Hulkamania, I'm dogpiling on them, and I'm just using the numbers advantage. They wrestle inside and outside of the cage. They even come out to the actual ring, because the ring setup for this was by the entrance. They had the ring and the cages set up through the whole night, while the actual ring was still set up in the middle of the arena in the standard position. I get why they did that, to give the fans in the arena that paid good money for those seats to get a little bit of the action. This was a mess. This was overindulgence. This is putting a hat on the hat. Overly gimmicked. The odds were insane. I mean, you have arguably the two best members of the Four Horsemen, the Face of Fear, a great tag team. Kevin Sullivan, a main event wrestler. Z-Gangster and Ultimate Solution, not so much, but hey, Zeus has been a name that's gave Hogan trouble in WWE, which is what they're playing off here. Ultimate Solution at least looked the part. And then you have Lex Luger, which I don't think I mentioned earlier that he was in this match, but Lex Luger is part of this group. And you would think with all of that firepower, you could take out two men. To me, this is worse than John Cena beating the whole Nexus by himself, because not only did you devalue the Horsemen, you devalued the Dungeon of Doom, you devalued the Ultimate Solution, which could have been a guy that maybe went on to be something more. You devalued Luger a bit in this. This is a mess. We see the end come with Luger accidentally hitting Ric Flair, which was a really bad botch and really poorly timed. Hogan and Savage get out of the cage, where it looks like they have to be told that no, escaping the cage wasn't the plan. Somebody has to get beat, so Savage goes back in and pins Flair. Just a cluster of an ending. This was bad. This was the worst match on the show, and I know I said that the Giant vs. Loch Ness was the worst match, but just the fact that this went on probably about 30 minutes of just meandering and really bad match in my opinion. Hogan and Savage pick up the win here. I'm going to give this one a 1. Again, I thought it was really bad. Scratch that. I'm giving it a 0. I can't even give it a 1, because saying that this was even to the Giant and Loch Ness match is being unfair to the Giant and Loch Ness. This is a terrible main event. It is rightfully maligned by wrestling fans because of how bad it is. I thoroughly thought it was boring. I thought it was uneventful. I thought it was badly booked. Just terrible in my opinion. Overall, this was a pretty interesting at best card. Interesting to see just how different the NWO made WCW, and we're talking just a couple of months difference here. I mean, I believe this was March and the NWO starts coming out in May. Just a bad show. The highlights I would say are the Regal and Finley match, even though I didn't like the end. The Booker T and Sting versus Road Warriors match I liked. I wish it would have been shorter. Conan and Eddie Guerrero is a good match. Didn't like the ending. So even on the good matches, I had problems with them. This is an utterly skippable card unless you just want to see just how low WCW was at this time period and how much of a revolution the NWO really was. I'm going to give the show overall a 1. The sum of the parts are worse than some of the matches on here, and the fact that probably a quarter of the show is spent on that convoluted main event really hurts it. Again, gonna give it a 1. With that being said, let's smash that like button, share the video, subscribe if you haven't. If you see where it says join, That's how you become a channel member. It definitely helps out the channel. If you made it all the way to the end here, let me know who your favorite wrestler out of the Alliance to end Hulkamania was. Was it Flair? Was it Luger? Ming? Kevin Sullivan? Let me know down here in the comments. With all that being said, my name is George Coles, and this has been another It Came From The Network.